Welcome to Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Deliver, your host, and I have a very special guest today. And I've said that about other people, but this really is a special guest. Got a gentleman by the name of Oakland McCulloch. Welcome to the show, Oak.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. I really look forward to this.
Yeah. So I need about 5 minutes to go over your bio before we start. So I'm just going to read some stuff about you, give people out there a little flavor of who you are. So you're a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. You're a speaker. You're an author. You just came out with a book, Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. We'll talk about that book a little later. But so you are a retired colonel, as you said, and the book is based on your 40 years of leadership in the U.S. Army and then subsequent civilian positions. You had a 23-year Army career, numerous leadership positions in the infantry and armor branches. You assisted in disaster relief operations for Hurricane Hugo in South Carolina and Hurricane Andrew in South Florida. You had operational deployments in Desert Shield, Desert Storm in Saudi Arabia and Iraq as a general aide de camp, support operations in Bosnia as a congressional liaison officer, and a peacekeeping deployment in Kosovo as an operations officer. And there's many more, I'm assuming, but that's kind of the highlight. So I wanted to get that out there because I'm very appreciative of your military service. I think, that's one of the things I wish I had done when I was younger, gone into the military. I think everyone should do it. And so thank you for your service and thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you. I tell everybody I loved every minute of my 23 years in the Army. I really did. And it's amazing how fast it went. Couldn't even tell you where it all went. It went so fast, but I got to do some amazing things and got to go to some amazing places that I would never have gotten to do if I hadn't been in the Army.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great option. I forget who I was talking to the other day, but I got out of high school in 77. And if you remember, we're close in age. I mean, back in those days, post-Vietnam War, the military wasn't a really sexy option.
That's right.
It was kind of.
I think for me, I'm a little younger than you. I graduated in 81, so about 4 years after you did. Yep. And so I think that's about where it started to turn and become a little bit more acceptable, I guess you could say, and more popular with the public. The military became more popular. But yeah, even then, I can remember there was still some backlash from the Vietnam War era.
Exactly. So I really want to touch on the subject of your book today is on leadership, because that's something I have always had a personal interest in. Looking back at, and leadership just isn't a title, right? I mean, looking back at teachers, coaches, parents, coworkers, leadership is not just a 9 to 5 job, right? It's a full-time job.
Absolutely. I always tell, I was just at the College of the Ozarks this week and got to give a convocation speech to a bunch of college students, sophomores and juniors. And if you've never looked up the College of the Ozarks, look it up. It's an amazing place. It really is. And so I told them, I said, look, you don't ever get to take a vacation from being a leader. Yeah. You get to take vacations, but you're still the leader. And I don't know how many times I've been on vacation with my wife and kids, and I'd be in charge of an organization in the Army, and they'd call up and say, hey, Captain McCulloch, Major McCulloch, Colonel McCulloch, I know you're on vacation, but we really got this issue and we need your input. And, my wife and kids would go off and do whatever it is wife and kids do on vacations. I would handle the situation. And when I was done, then I'd go back to being the husband and the father on vacation. But you are the leader, and you have to accept that fact, because it is a privilege to be the leader. And anybody who doesn't believe that it's a privilege, then you need to go do something else. You really do.
No, I completely agree. And like I said, I've said this many times on my shows. If I look back at my life, I can probably count on one hand the really top-notch leaders. And I'm not saying just teachers, coaches, it's just people that I've come in contact with. And again, that's not to say that everyone else is a bum, by the way. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that the truly inspirational leaders are just a handful in my life, I would say.
Yeah, well, we were talking before the show. Probably the three most inspirational person or influential people in my life. My father, certainly. I am who I am because of him. There's no doubt about it. And then I had a basketball coach in high school, Coach Nitzwicki, who I still stay in touch with today, and an amazing man who I give a lot of credit for developing me as a young man. And then my high school history instructor, my history teacher, Mr. Schindler, who I still stay in touch with today, who, by the way, was a Vietnam vet. And I majored in history in college, and people ask me, so why'd you major in history? I said, first of all, because I wasn't smart enough to be an engineer. and second of all, because of Mr. Schindler, no doubt about it. He had that much of an influence on me.
Yeah. So before we get into the guts of the book, first question I always ask, why'd you write the book?
Yeah, so I really wrote it because I got to go back. When I was a professor of military science at the University of South Alabama, I was going around talking to high school students and college students and a couple businesses, local businesses and organizations. But I'd talk about, like, with the high school and college students, I'd say, so what do you want to do in life? What do you want to be? And they'd tell me what profession they wanted to do and that they want to be a leader. And I'd say, great. The world needs more leaders. I said, so what is it that a leader does? Well, what do you think that is? And then you get that deer in the headlights.
Yeah, exactly.
They had no idea what a leader did. They just knew they wanted to be one, and probably for the wrong reason. They probably wanted to do it because they thought that, it's got a sexy title, you get more pay, all those kinds of things, which is, you do, and that's great, but that shouldn't be why you want to be the leader. So they had no idea. So I came up with a presentation that I've been given. And it's pretty much the same one I gave this week at the College of the Ozarks. I can tailor it to whatever audience I have at whatever. But so then at this point in my life, my passion is to talk to as many young men and women and people as I can about leadership. And I knew that if I wanted to reach more people, more than just my local area here, I had to do two things. I had to write a book, and I had to get out on the speaking circuits,
sure,
and do those kinds of things. So my wife and I and her mom and a couple other people who live in our condo, we went to a motivational speaker at our Catholic church back in February 2020. And a guy named Jonathan Fanning. I don't know if you've ever heard him speak, but he's an amazing speaker. He really is. And just impressed me. And he was giving motivation and all that. And during the breaks, I would go up and talk to him. And that night, when I got home, that was the 15th of February. That night, when I got home, I wrote out my outline for my book. The next day, I started writing it. So that was the 16th of February, 2020. I published a book on the 12th of February, 2021. And so I always wanted to write it. And he kind of motivated me to actually sit down and do it.
Yeah, no, that you raise a good point, because every author is different, but you got to have motivation. You have to have a motivation to write a book, right, whether doing for personal reasons or what have you. But this was obviously a passion of yours, right?
It is, absolutely.
I mean, no question about it. So, well, what's your definition of leadership, Oak? I mean, it's like we talked. Everyone has their own definition, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear yours.
You should have your own definition. I'm not a proponent that there's one definition out there that everybody has to follow. I throw one up on the screen when I give my presentation, and I kind of use the Army's definition of the official definition. But to me, a leader is very simple. A couple things. Number one, a leader has to lead by example. I mean, my father when I was growing up, he said, son, if your words say one thing and your actions say another, it is your actions that will be believed 100%.
Yeah, you got to be, it's called being congruent, right?
That's right. You got to walk the walk. If you can talk the talk all you want, nobody cares. It's what you do that is believed.
And there's a lot of leaders, quote unquote leaders out there that do just that. By the way.
Absolutely there are. We gotta fix the direction that this country is going at all levels in all professions, because we have some people that it's absolutely scary what some people are calling leadership. So you gotta lead by example. Number two is you gotta develop the next generation of leaders. If you're not mentoring somebody, if you're calling yourself a leader and you don't have people you are mentoring, then I'm saying you're not a leader, you're a boss. Leaders produce more leaders. That's what leaders do. And it goes back to the book, the quote that I had in my book that I absolutely believe. I wish I could take credit for it. Master Sergeant David Powell, a senior NCO who worked for me, came up with this quote one day, and I say it all the time, and it's on a plaque on my wall, and it has been ever since he said it. It said, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. And I believe that 100%. It's our job to hand that down. And the great thing about that quote, Paul, is that you can take that word nations and you can substitute any word you want in there. Company, sports team, university, whatever. And it doesn't change the meaning of that at all. So you got to set the example and you got to produce the next generation of leaders. That's what leaders are.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that one. You're a military guy. I'm more in the business community. Are those skills transferable from what you learned in the military to the business world?
Absolutely. Leadership is leadership. I believe that 100%. And this is why I believe it is transferable. And I believe that leadership is leadership, because leadership is about people, period. It's not about flow charts. It's not about
spreadsheets and
any of that stuff. It is about people. And if you can lead people, you can lead anything you want. And I'm a perfect example of that. 23 years in the Army. My job was an infantry officer and an armor officer. My actual job that I actually got paid for, whether I was doing it or not, was to kill people and blow stuff up, win wars. That's what my job was. When I retired from the Army, I ran a food bank for 18 months. You don't get any different than that. That's 180 difference.
I saw that in your book. I'm like, boy, that's a reach. U.S. military, blowing things up and killing people to running a food bank. I'm like,
yeah, but it was about service. And again, I'm about service, and I believe that. But when I took over that food bank, we were handing out 1.2 million pounds of food a year. When I handed it off 18 months later, we were handing out 3.8 million pounds. So leadership is leadership. If you can lead people, then you can lead any organization. I don't care where you learned it. I don't care where you practiced it. Leadership is leadership. I believe that 100%.
Yeah. I mean, again, you have your examples in your life. I have mine. If I look at the people that I would consider true leaders, I look at how they made me feel about what I was doing and about myself. So I've always said, good leaders inspire, they motivate, they educate, and they make you feel good about yourself. And
Absolutely.
I've said the ones that I know, I would run through a wall for to this day.
Yep, absolutely. So along that line, two things that I think are the most important things that a leader has to do for their organization. Number one is you must develop the culture of your organization. And that's what you're saying. Make everybody understand they're a valued member of the team. Cultures are based on standards and values. I believe that. If you figure out what you want your organization, the values you want your organization to have, and the standards that you're going to enforce to have those values, and then you come up with a vision and a plan on how you're going to get that organization from where it is today to where you want it a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, inside of that culture that you are developing. And those are the two things that a leader needs to be able to do above anything else. For that organization to turn it into a successful organization, in my opinion. And I had this discussion, I don't know, about a month ago, I guess, with a gentleman. And I was saying that to develop your culture of your organization takes time, energy, money, resources. It's not easy. Training, it's not easy. And he said, no, you're wrong. And I said, what do you mean? He said, all I got to do is hire the right people. I said, tell me how that works for you. That's good luck with that, young man, because that is not the right answer.
I agree. So again, you can speak to the military piece, but I'll speak to the business world. I see so much turnover in organizations, and they just keep hiring people. And it's so expensive to onboard a new employee,
Absolutely.
Get them up to speed. And I would think that companies would want to build a better environment, better culture to foster more success, both personal and professional, but they don't.
No,
I can tell you right now, they don't.
And again, it comes down to culture. If you develop the right culture, people will want to stay. They will want to continue to work for it. And I think it was Richard Branson, and I think I put it in the book, but one of my favorite quotes, and I believe it's Richard Branson, he said, train people so they can leave. They have the ability to leave, but treat them so that they don't want to leave.
Correct.
That's what you're talking about. And it's exactly true. If you develop the right culture, people and train people, and that's another thing that leaders have to do that we can get into later on, but train people and develop the culture, then your organization, it's unlimited what your organization can do. Absolutely.
Yeah, you talk about in the book about taking care of your people. That kind of falls in line with what you're talking about, right?
That's absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You have to, because if you don't take care of people, they're going to go find somebody who will take care of them. I promise you.
So one of the things I thought was interesting in your book was you talked about, your failures, right? How you handle failure, and taking responsibility and accountability for your actions. I think that's a big one too.
Yeah, and we are lacking that in this country right now. If probably the world, but certainly this country, at all levels, in all professions, whether it's politics, the military, the universities, religion, all professions. I see right now. I see people who will not stand up and take responsibility for what their actions and their organization's actions. Because look, if you're the leader of an organization, I don't care what that organization is, you are responsible for everything that does or does not happen in that organization. Even if you didn't do it, you're still responsible. You are the person who has your name on the blame line, and you got to be willing to own everything in your organization. And again, when I'm in charge of an organization, if my guys and gals if we accomplish what we're supposed to, I walk up to my boss and I say, hey, boss, look what my guys and gals did. And oh, by the way, John, Jane, and Joe did a great job today.
Yeah. And you use the right term here. We.
Absolutely. It is. It's not about you. It's about the organization. It's about the people. And if we didn't accomplish what we were supposed to, then I walk up to my boss and I say, hey, boss, I messed up, and here's how we're going to fix it.
Right.
Not we at that point. It's me, because I'm the owner of that organization. I'm the responsibility. I messed up, and this is how we're going to fix it.
Yeah, I always say, when you if things aren't going well, and you go to your leader, say, hey, I have a plan. You can't just throw your hands up in the air and say,
don't come with me problems. Come with me solutions.
Yeah. I remember an old boss. I was young, I'm probably in my 20s, and I went to my boss with a problem. And I said, man, what are we going to tell the customer? And he says, well, why don't we start with the truth?
There you go. There's a concept for you, huh?
Yeah. I'm like, wow, that's a simple concept, right? You start with the truth and then you build from there, right? Again, lessons learned in life,
Yeah. Well, I had a boss who told me one time, he said, Oak, nobody's perfect in this world, even though I try to convince my wife I am. She's not buying it. But he said,
me too, by the way.
Yeah. Isn't that all of us guys? But the boss said, look, you're going to make a mistake. I don't care if you make a mistake. What do you do after you made the mistake? Do you own up to it? Do you say, I made a mistake? Or do you try to hide it? You blame somebody else? If you own up to it and say, I made a mistake, here's how we're going to fix it, then let's do it. Let's go fix it.
And people, I think, will respect you more, Oak.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you start coming with BS excuses, people see right through that. If you just say, hey, man, again, I'm relating it to my world right now. We have customers, we're in the information technology business. And if we make a mistake, I go right to the customer and say, hey, look, this didn't work the way we thought it would be. We're going to fix it though. And Absolutely. You disarm them too, right? They say, okay, this guy's a stand-up guy. He's honest.
He being honest with, and you're right. You not only does those people respect you, like for me, my boss respects me because I came and told him the truth. I messed up, and here's how we're going to fix it. But the people who work for you respect you as well. That that you're standing up for the organization and not throwing them under the bus, because again, they're gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. You just got to learn from the mistakes and don't do it again, because then it's not a mistake; it's a failure to learn. But
yeah, so I want to touch on something else that you mentioned in the book. You talk about being the moral compass of an organization too. So it's not just just leadership; it's setting that moral example every day as well. Am I correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. I think that, that's all part of the values, part of a culture. And I think if we want to get back to having America as great as it can be, and look, America is the greatest country in the world. I've been in 45 countries on 5 continents. This is, even with all our problems, and we have a lot of problems, this is still the greatest country in the world at this point. May not stay that way if we keep going the way we're going, but right now we are still the greatest country in the world. But if we want to get to where and there's a great quote, America is great because America is good. If America ever ceases to be good, it will cease to be great. Absolutely, I believe that. And I think that we got to get back to where we are setting the examples of those kinds of things. And it goes back to the culture. If you set your culture based on values and then standards to uphold those values, then you're going to do good things, and good things are what we need to get back to doing. And I think it rests on the leader. The people who work for you are kind of like your children. They are going to do what you let them do. If you let them do bad things, they're going to do bad things.
Yeah.
If you hold them to a standard and make them do good things, they're going to do good things. And good leaders don't give them the option. Good leaders don't give them the option to do bad things. You hold them to a standard. You make sure everybody knows what the standard is, and you hold them to it. And you only have to make sure, I don't like to use the phrase, make an example of somebody, but sometimes you have to do that. You only have to punish somebody for not meeting the standard one time. And generally people will start falling in line again because they understand that it is a standard. Standard means that is what is expected of you.
That's the expectation, right? And then there's no ambiguity there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to, being a leader, sometimes you have to make tough decisions, right? There's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. That's why we pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked about in the book where you had to make a tough decision to relieve a soldier of his duty. And I'll let you tell the story, but that was not a popular decision on your part.
It was not.
And your leadership's part. And you said it affected your career, right?
Yeah, it did.
Tell me a little bit about that one. Because again, that's talking about you had standards. That soldier didn't meet the standards, and again, I don't want to steal your thunder. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was a company commander, and I had a soldier in my company who, was writing bad checks, was in debt downtown, was borrowing money from soldiers that were under his responsibility. He had a DUI. He slapped his wife and was arrested for spousal abuse. And he had 17 years in the Army, a sergeant first class in the Army. So should be setting the example for the soldiers in his unit. And he certainly wasn't. And so I went, and this soldier had been counseled many times. It wasn't like I just woke up one day and said, "No, I'm done. I'm not." We had written counselings with, you're doing this. This is how you got to fix it, not just for me, but from the prior commander as well. So I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, boss, we got to get this man out of the Army, and I'm going to start the paperwork to make that happen." And he said, "No, you're not." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "No, you're not." He said, "That man has 17 years in the Army. He deserves to retire from the Army." And I said, "Nobody deserves to retire from the Army.
The privilege, right?
You earn the right to retire from the Army. And he has not earned that." I said, "I am going to start the paperwork." And he basically said, "Look, if you do go down this route, it will reflect on your officer evaluation report." And I said, "Okay, I'm going down this route." Right. And I did. And I went down, and he fought me every step of the way. And it eventually went to the 2-star general, and he agreed with me. And we put the guy out of the Army, and it reflected on my officer evaluation report. And that evaluation report absolutely affected the trajectory of my career. And it's probably why I retired a lieutenant colonel, or one of the reasons that I retired a lieutenant colonel rather than a colonel. But that's okay. I can look in the mirror every single day and understand that I know I did the right thing for the unit and for the Army and for this country, because that man did not deserve to stay. He didn't deserve the privilege to lead other people. And so I would do it all again if I had it to do again.
Yeah. Like I said, you can sleep at night when your head hits a pillow, you did the right thing.
I did. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, you talked a lot in the book. You had some nice stories about success stories, about like leadership and changing culture. You have one story I'd like you to talk about about the training on the Bradley.
The Bradley or the mortar platoon?
That's a good question. My notes say the Bradley, but there was you took over.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You're right. So I was a lieutenant, second lieutenant. I had a Bradley infantry platoon, and our platoon, not just because of me, I had a great NCO, Sergeant First Class Penson, which is another story. Great NCO, great leader. Again, I was the lieutenant. I was in charge, but I'm telling you, he was as good a leader as I was, if not better. But the two of us developed a very good platoon that stood out in the battalion and in the brigade. We had the highest average on gunnery. We did a lot of great things. And there was another platoon in our company. There are 3 platoons, infantry platoons in the company. There was another one that was just at the bottom of the battalion and the brigade, and probably the division in every stat. And one day, my boss, a captain, we were talking, and he was talking about that platoon, and I said, "There's nothing wrong with that platoon." I said, "The soldiers in that platoon are as good as any soldiers in any other platoon. The problem is the leader." And it goes back to the great quote by Napoleon Bonaparte that there's no bad regiments, they're just bad commanders. And I absolutely believe that. I mean, those soldiers could do anything that my soldiers in my platoon could do. They just weren't given the opportunity. They weren't trained. The culture wasn't developed. The vision wasn't there. So I told, just offhand, I didn't really want this to happen, but I said, if you put me in charge of that platoon tomorrow, I'll change the trajectory of that platoon. And he said, "Done."
Be careful what you ask for.
I said, "You got to be kidding me." So he did. He put me in charge of that platoon. And we did. And in about 3 months, that platoon was doing everything that any other platoons in the battalion were doing. It was scoring well in gunnery. It was winning out in the field. It was producing, it was doing all the things that it should have done because of leadership. Leadership is so important. I always tell people, you show me an organization that's failing, I'll show you an organization that has a poor leader. You show me one that's successful, and I'll show you an organization that has a good leader. It really is that it's that important to every organization at every level.
Yeah, completely agree. One thing you talked about too is, and I firmly agree with this one, is the leaders that I've seen out there that have been successful trust their leadership skills.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't change. Right. They may deviate a little bit, but if they're successful, when things are bad, they don't change. When things are good, they don't change. They kind of know, like, hey, we've got a couple of bumps in the road here, but we're doing all the right things. Let's continue on this path.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I always tell people when you hear somebody say, when they're talking about leadership and probably most things in the world that aren't technical stuff or invention type stuff, if they're talking about like leadership and anything else that is a standard that's been around for years, thousands of years. When somebody says, "I figured out a new way to throw the BS flag," because there are no new ways to do this. I mean, come on, leadership is leadership. It's been the same thing. The principles are the same. They're going to be the same 1,000 years from now, because again, it's about people. It's, we're going to get new technology and all those things that will help us be leaders, but it's not going to change the principles about what good leadership is. So good leaders understand, if you've been trained well, and that's our job as this generation of leaders, to train the next generation of leaders well, then if you've been trained well, then stick, no matter what's going on, stick to the principles. They will work, I promise you. And it may take a while, like if you take over an organization like I had to, and I have several times in my career. Sometimes a boss of mine would put me in charge of an organization because he wanted it to change. He wanted things to happen in there that weren't happening. So just stick with it and continue to do the things that good leaders do, and eventually it will work out, I promise you.
Yeah, and to that point, I think what happens is when leaders don't have confidence in their abilities, they tend to start micromanaging, and doing unnatural things. You talked about that in the book as well.
Yeah. Anybody here ever been micromanaged? I mean,
everyone. Who hasn't?
It's horrible. That has got to be one of the worst things ever. You want to kill morale in an organization, micromanage people.
It's never worked. It never will work.
No, absolutely not.
I don't. And people, what's funny though about that, Oak, is that everyone listening to this right now will say, well, I'm a manager, I'm a boss, whatever it might be, but I don't micromanage. You probably do, by the way, just so you know. Probably. You know, they don't think they are, but they are. Right? Yeah.
So I had a boss who retired a 4-star general, so obviously way smarter than me. And he said, Oak, leadership is a scale. He said, on one end, you got authoritarian leadership and micromanagers, horrible people. You want to be as far away from that as you can. On the other end of the scale, you have chaos and Attila the Hun. And he said, you want to be as close to chaos as you feel comfortable. The closer you get to chaos, the closer you get to Attila the Hun and the chaos, the better leader and the better your organization is going to be. And he said, and the way you get there is very simple. He said, the way you get as close to that as you can is that, first of all, you train the people in your organization and you trust that they're going to do the things you've trained them to do. But then you give them a mission, a vision, an idea, and say, this is what I want it to look like a month from now, a week from now, whatever it is. Here are the resources you can use, the people, the time, the money, whatever. And, oh, by the way, here's the authority to do whatever you need to do to make it happen. Now, you can never give away responsibility, just like we talked earlier.
Yep.
Responsibility is always yours. But you can give away as much authority as you want, and you should. You should want to give away all the authority that you have when you give somebody a mission or a task or a job, because that's how they're going to do. That's how the creativity is going to happen. They're going to use their knowledge, their imagination, their abilities. Will they do things the way you would have done it? Probably not.
Yep.
Who cares? Who cares? As long as they give you what you wanted and they stay inside your limits, why do you care how they got there?
That's right. Yeah.
And the evil of micromanaging is really this. When you're that authoritarian leader or micromanager, if you're not an authoritarian leader, but you still think you don't mind micromanage, but you are, then this is what you're doing. You are cheating that person out of the experience of doing what you've asked them to do. So now the evil of that is you haven't only cheated that person out of it, you've cheated everybody who's ever going to work for that person out of that experience, because that person can't pass it on to the next person. So you may be affecting your organization for the next 20 years.
Yeah. No, and delegating, right? You talked about that in the book is you got to, I look at it like having kids, right? You know, when your kid's growing up and they start running and they fall and they scrape their knee, or they, you know, you can't hover over them and they're going to fall and scrape their knee. Right. So it's kind of like, okay, next time he knows or she knows that if I run too fast, I'm going to fall, I'll learn. Right. So it's kind of, it's a simple example, but it's a pertinent example, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and look, again, go back to everybody's going to make mistakes. I think a good leader, and again, I've had people argue with me on this, and that's fine if they believe otherwise. But I think a good leader doesn't allow his people to fail. Doesn't mean you don't allow them to make mistakes, because they're going to make mistakes, and they'll learn from their mistakes. That's okay. But a good leader will step in and not let things fail, if possible. I got it. There's times when something happens that nobody was expecting and something fails. Got it. But you can't. It just drives me nuts, and I got to touch on this one before we move on to something else. These self-proclaimed leadership experts, and I hate that word expert. I don't believe.
So there's a million of them out there.
Oh, there are, and I actually had one who told me that it's acceptable to have failure. And I said, no, it's never acceptable to have failure. It's going to happen, and when it does, you got to say, okay, what happened? And let's fix it so it never happens again.
Right.
Failure is never a good thing. Anybody who tells you that failure is a good thing, you get as far away from that person as you can, because that is horrible. Again, does it happen every once in a while? Absolutely. Sure. But you should never say that it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's kind of, again, it's everyone gets a trophy mentality, right? Oh, it's okay,
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. And then that's, you can do everything right. And you may not still be a good leader because you have to get results. Because in the real world, as you know, in the business world, in the real world, results matter. It doesn't matter how good of a leader you are. If you're not getting results, you're going to be judged by not getting results. And one of my favorites is when somebody will walk up to me and say, well, I don't judge myself against other people. I only judge myself against myself. And I said, well, that's good. You should judge yourself against yourself. But if you believe for a second that you are not being judged by the people who you work for against other people who are doing the same job you're doing, then you are very naive, young man or young lady. Yeah. Because you are. That's how we pick. That's how we do promotions. That's how we pick people who are going to get raises based on results. And I'm a firm believer. I just want to win at everything I do. I don't care if I'm playing Candyland with my grandkids. I want to win. Okay.
Yeah, it's funny
you say. If you don't want to win, I don't want you on my team.
Yeah, I think it was your book. Correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Oak. But I think you said you went to like one of your kids' soccer games, and they weren't keeping score.
Yeah, well, it was Fort Irwin, California. My kids were little kids, and first day we go to the first meeting, and they said, we signed them all up, and the person in charge of the league comes and says, well, we're not going to keep score because we're not going to keep score. And I said, why? And I said, because it's not important who wins. It's just important that they all learn some skills. And I looked at my kids and I said, they may not keep score. We're keeping score because it matters who wins.
Yeah.
And my kids will tell you that mentality that I put in them, the same mentality that my father put in me, has helped them throughout life. My father really did instill that in me. He said as I was growing up, he had this thing called the 75% rule. And he said, son, if you can't do something better than 75% of the people who are doing it, then you need to go do something. You need to do one of two things. You either need to figure out how to get better at it, or you need to go do something else, because obviously it doesn't matter enough to you to get good at it. So I live by that 75% rule, and I passed it on to my kids, and I hope they pass it on to their kids.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, and the other, now we're getting to a different subject, is finding something you're passionate about in life, right?
Yes.
Because, you chose the military. Obviously, you thoroughly enjoyed that, and you've had a long, distinguished career doing it. And I tell my kids, just because you went to college to get a degree in X doesn't mean you have to do X the rest of your life.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, if you're not happy with what you're doing, you got to be able to make change. And you talk about change in your book too. You can't be afraid of change.
Absolutely, change is. Everything changes. Now, we as humans, we are creatures of habit. We hate change. The example I use all the time is for guys, if you shave in the morning, remember how you shaved, because I promise you tomorrow you're going to shave the exact same way. Probably almost to the stroke, exactly the same. When you put your shoes on in the morning, you put your shoes on the exact same way every single morning. We are creatures of habit, whether we don't even think about it. We are just creatures of habit. So when you're trying to change something in an organization, the first thing that comes in somebody's mind is, how's that going to affect me? Because now I can't do something the same way I've always done it. And I hate that answer. When you ask somebody why they're doing something that way, and they say, well, that's the way we've always done it. Oh, that answer drives me nuts. But so when change is going to happen. That's just a fact of life. If you want to get better, if you want your organization to stay at the forefront of whatever profession it is that you're in, you're going to have to make changes. So don't be afraid to make changes. Just be smart about the way you do it. I always tell people, I don't like to change things right away. The one thing I change immediately, when I take over an organization, the night before I take it over, my wife and I go into my office that it's going to be, and we put all of the I love me stuff up on the walls, like you can see behind me here. And, and as the desk is facing one way, it's going to face the next way, another way tomorrow, because I want people to know there's somebody new in town. But then I don't like to change things unless the organization is doing something illegal or immoral or dangerous.
That's
then,
a
of course,
story.
You got to change those right away. But if they're not, then I just like to walk around and see and ask questions. I'll walk around to people and where they're doing their job. And I say, so why are you doing it that way? Is there a better way to do it? Is there something I can do to help you make that a better process? And I ask that of as many people as I can. And then I kind of take a snapshot of where I think we are. And then like I said before, then I come up with my vision of where I want to be and how we're going to get there. And that's going to entail change, because if you keep doing things exactly the same way you've been doing them, you're going to get the same result. I promise. Things aren't magically going to change. If you want to change what's happening, you got to make changes. That's the only way it's going to happen. And we have to change. I mean, anybody who doesn't think you have to change, you're not going to be successful. That's just a fact of life.
No, so I guess we'll kind of finish off with, we talked a lot about leadership. And I think mentoring is probably the most important thing in building the next generation of leaders. But if someone hasn't been mentored, if someone doesn't have that person, like you had your father, you've had other military, what would you recommend someone do? Like kid out of college, first job, guy enters, what would your recommendation? In addition to reading your book, by the way.
Thanks for that. So it's funny that you asked that question, because I just had a young lady at College of the Ozarks, when I was talking, asked me the question. She said, as a brand new leader, young leader, aspiring leader who's going to take over an organization, what's the number one thing that you would tell me? So I'll say that first, and I'll talk about mentor. And I told her the number one thing the advice I give to young leaders is get to know the people in your organization. Every day, pick one person and get to know something personal about that. Not something about the work environment, something personal about the person's wife or husband's name, their kid's name, their hobbies. Find something personal, because when you start doing that, then you start building that team. As Vince Lombardi said, a team isn't a group of people who work together. It's a group of people who trust each other. And building that trust, that's part of building that trust, is making people understand that you care about them and that they matter in the organization. So if you're a young person and you've never been mentored and you're taking over in a leadership position, then what I tell you is go find your own mentor. Go find somebody that you look up to, that you think is doing the right things, and ask them if they would mind being your mentor. And I guarantee you 99% of them are going to say, yes, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, they'd be flattered, right?
Absolutely, because good leaders want to be mentors to people. You want to do that because we understand that at some point, old people like me are going to turn around, we're going to hand it off to the next generation. And hopefully we train them well enough that they're going to do a better job than we did. So don't be afraid to ask somebody. If hopefully somebody's going to see that you're doing a great job and they're going to walk up and ask, kind of take over as your mentor. But if that doesn't happen, then go find your own mentor. And then once that happens, and then you've got to go find somebody to mentor in your organization. And it doesn't have to be a leader. It doesn't have to be, it can be anybody in your organization, and you're mentoring them to take the next position, whatever that is. And maybe not even in your organization. Maybe they'll move to another organization, and that's okay, because then you're making that organization better. And that's what leadership is about, making people better. And when we commission all these brand new second lieutenants out of our ROTC program, the day that they get commissioned, I tell them, one of the last things I tell them is go out and make a difference. Because good leaders make a difference in the lives of the people who work for them. They make a difference in the organization that they lead, and they make a difference in the community. Because leadership starts at home, it spreads to the community, and then it's into the organizations. And if we go get back to teaching that it's all of that, it isn't just about you making more money and having a nicer title, then I think this country is going to be a better place.
Yeah, and we'll kind of finish on that note. I agree with. I think leadership in this country is lacking right now, and I think we need help. And I think it starts at home. It starts at every level. That's if we can all be better, I think this country will be a better place for sure.
Absolutely, I agree, Paul. Absolutely.
So, well, cool. Well, that's good luck with the book, Oak. I'm sure it'll do well. Like I said, I've already recommended it to a few people, and I'll be following you, and maybe you become something a world famous, a motivational speaker one of these days.
I hopefully I just get to become a good motivational speaker and get some more spots. I've got a few coming up, and that's good. That's why I did this, so I get out there and talk to more people.
Yeah, and you're having fun doing it. I can tell.
Absolutely.
When you're passionate about something, it's easy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I told my wife, I said, I don't know where this is all headed, but it seems to be going in the right direction. And I said, it's just not as fast as I'd like for it to. And she said, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, great. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I really enjoyed this. Again, leadership is something I've always taken an interest in, and thoroughly enjoyed the book and having you on the show.
Thank you, Paul. I enjoyed being on the show.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And that's another wrap for Business Brains and the Bottom Line. Paul Delibero signing off. Until next time.